Assalamualaikum, peace be upon you all, and welcome to tonight's public lecture, everyone. The topic for tonight is, shall we say, slightly controversial, the history and symbolism of the Hagia Sophia. And to emphasize the importance of this talk, I have flown to Turkey to present it live on site for the lawns outside this great building. So it's been in the news lately, all over YouTube and Facebook, and everyone seems to have an opinion on the status of the Hagia Sophia. But aside from the politics and the right and wrong, what about the history of the building and the symbolism? What does it mean to different faith groups, Muslims, Christians, or even those who just take an interest in the world's heritage, or even just those plain old loves of historic and iconic architecture? So inshallah, tonight's talk will give you some insight into the importance of this iconic building to help you form your own view. Very shortly, I'll hand over to our speaker for tonight to present on the topic. But before I do, a reminder that after the talk, there will be an opportunity for you to ask your questions. So please write them in the chat box and please keep them on topic. A further reminder that any inappropriate comments will be moderated out. So please be mindful of that. And with that, I would like to welcome our speaker for tonight, Dr. Mehmet Ozalp, Director, Center for Islamic Studies and Civilization, Charles Sturt University, and Executive Director, ISRA Australia. So with that, it's over to you, Dr. Mehmet Ozalp.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Orhan. And it's great to be speaking on this topic tonight. It's a bit of a historical moment in 2020. Not only the coronavirus, but certain world events have been historic. And one of those is the conversion of Hagia Sophia or Hagia Sophia from a museum back into a mosque. Now, Hagia Sophia, or I should say, use the word maybe Hagia Sophia, which is the Greek pronunciation. It means holy wisdom. It is the oldest, one of the oldest standing structures in the world that has historical significance. 1,500-year history, more than that, as a place of worship, and it's been converted from Orthodox Church into a Catholic cathedral first. Not many people know that in 13th century. Then it's been converted back into an Orthodox Church, and then after the conquest of Constantinople, or modern-day Istanbul, it was converted into a mosque. And then in 1934, converted to a museum, and now 2020, back into a mosque. So it's been probably a building that had many uses, and this such conversion, it's unique in that respect. One of the things that's really important about Hagia Sophia is its symbolic value that it has for Christians, Muslims, and many other secularists in Turkey or elsewhere in the world. So that's what I'm going to cover tonight. I'm going to examine the history of the building as a place of worship, and I'll be discussing particularly how and why it was converted into a mosque in 1453. And also why it was converted into a museum, and most recently why it was converted back to a mosque again. And in this respect, I'll be looking at it from it has political ramifications, of course. In all three decisions, there was politics involved, but also there was more than that. Some other things, important things were under consideration. So let's begin. So firstly, to cover the early history of Hagia Sophia, before it was there, the biggest church in Constantinople was Hagia Irene, and that's the picture on the right. It's still standing within Topkapı Palace in present-day Istanbul. It was built in 337 by Emperor Constantine. And you might know that Emperor Constantine was instrumental in the choice of Trinitarian Christianity in 325 Nicene Council. So he's been, through Constantine, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. So that 337 that this church was built, and that Emperor Constantine developed Constantinople from a simple Greek trading colony to become the capital of the entire Roman Empire. Now, this Roman Empire was at the time split into two: Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire, and Constantinople became the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. And also this Hagia Sophia was the seat of the Patriarchate of Eastern Orthodox Church. So Constantinople is not only the capital of the Roman Empire, but also the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church resided in that place. And the building, Hagia Sophia, was symbolic of that. So these two aspects are important later on when Fatih Sultan Mehmet conquered the city as well. The Hagia Sophia was built 360, and at the time it had a timber roof, so it wasn't like the dome-like structure that we see today. And it was burnt in some riots in 404. It was rebuilt, and then it burnt again in other riots in 532. And at this point, the Emperor Justinian decided to build a third, but entirely different basilica. That's the one that we have present with us today, the one with the majestic dome and this massive structure that was started in 532, and then it was built in 5 years. It became the largest construction project after the pyramids, and historians say that, chroniclers say that around 10,000 people worked on the project. And when it was completed, it became the seat of the Patriarchate of Constantinople, which is the head of the Greek Orthodox Church, was moved to Hagia Sophia. And all of the Byzantine imperial ceremonies and coronations also took place in the building. So it became a symbol of Eastern Orthodox Christianity and the Roman Empire. Also, we should note that in 476, the Western Roman Empire collapsed. So it was the Roman Empire was only remained as Rome in Istanbul, centered in Istanbul, and it was called now Byzantine Empire. So throughout the medieval era, the building was destroyed a few times, or not completely, but certain sections collapsed during major earthquakes, and it went through a number of repairs. And in 1204, Constantinople and Hagia Sophia was sacked by the Crusaders, the Fourth Crusade. They were going into Jerusalem, and on the way, they kind of captured Constantinople and sacked the city. And the Hagia Sophia was converted to a Catholic cathedral until 1261, when it was retained back as an Orthodox church. This, sacking of and converting of Hagia Sophia has been a sore point with Catholic and Eastern Orthodox relations. I'm not sure if it's still to this day, but at the time and a number of centuries after that, it was a major issue. Now, the symbolism of Hagia Sophia as a church, if I was to sum this up, one, it was the largest church in the world until it was converted into a mosque. And two, it was the seat of Eastern Orthodox Church. And three, it was the symbol of Roman Empire, especially since after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Now we see that, especially the last aspect being the symbol of Roman Empire, it plays a key role, both with Constantinople and Hagia Sophia, when the city is conquered by Ottomans. Now, so centuries pass, And, you know, Constantinople is conquered after a 53-day siege on 29th May 1953. Now, I put the actual date, 29th of May. It's significant because it falls onto Sunday. So the city fell on Sunday, and the first Friday prayer was conducted in the Hagia Sophia on Friday of that week. So,
John, just to interrupt you, I think you have a typo that's 1453, not 1953.
oh yes, no worries. Thank you very much for that. I'll fix that typo. Maybe I should do that now, actually. Yeah. Now, so there is some. There was some when Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque. There was a lot of messages on social media saying that Fatih Sultan Mehmet purchased the building and we converted it after purchasing it. That's not true, and let me explain why. Now, when the city was under siege, you know, Fatih Sultan Mehmet tried 3 times to peacefully surrender the city to prevent pillage, because if according to the laws at the time, it's like how a city is treated and its inhabitants really makes a huge difference if it's surrendered or it's conquered by force. Now, Byzantine Empire rejected a number of times, and now according to the laws of that time, and this is the Islamic law, but also the international law at the time. Actually, international law at the time was much harsher, where, you know, like Mongols and Crusaders, when they captured the cities, they just completely decimated it, killing inhabitants. Basically, the entire city was up in their mercy. Now, Islamic law kind of regulated that practice in the world. It didn't start it, but it regulated it, saying that if a city was conquered by force, and the Arabic word is anwatan qahran, then the entire city was considered spoils of war, and that it should be split between the army, and the army had the right to pillage the city for 3 days. And and all the movable assets would be split amongst the troops, 1/5 remaining with the state or the head of state, and also land and buildings would belong to the state as well. So basically, the previous owners of the city lose complete right over that city once it's conquered by force. Now, we can be critical of this from today's perspective, but this was the law at the time. So basically, Fatih Sultan Mehmet wanted to stay within the law, but he wanted to prevent it. So he asked 3 times for the surrender of the city, but the emperor refused. So, and he was under a lot of pressure. His commanders were urging him to stop the siege, because it was really taking a long time and it was becoming costly in loss of lives and also the money. And also help from Europe was on its way. So basically, Fatih declared general assault and also reluctantly proclaimed the city open for sacking. We say reluctantly because all historians kind of agree on this, like Fatih was really not for this particular thing, but he felt that he had no choice for city to collapse its defenses, and then it was conquered, and the city was sacked, but Sultan ended it on its first day, and also both Muslim and Byzantine sources agree that Sultan Mehmet was saddened when he saw the sacked city. Again, this is all within the law all the time that it's happening. And while this was happening, the Christian population took refuge in Hagia Sophia, and Sultan Mehmet himself entered the building and declared amnesty to the population that was in there. Amnesty as in they weren't going to be harmed, you know, they weren't going to be killed or anything like that. And when I want to also make a correction here that when I say they sacked the city, they haven't touched the population, so there's no raping or killing happening. It's just that people are going and collecting property, anything that's movable, that's all. And even when some of the buildings were damaged, you know, people who damaged it was actually penalized later on. So basically, you know, Hagia Sophia was converted to a mosque, not through purchase, but through conquest. And because it was a building, and Fatih Sultan Mehmet decided to convert it to a mosque. And I'll explain why he decided to do that a little bit later. But before we go into that, how Fatih saw the conquest, this is important. Like how he saw the conquest and what happened immediately afterwards. Now, in 1466, the George of Trabzon, he was at the time it was Greek. He wrote to the Sultan and said, "No one doubts that you are emperor of the Romans. Whoever holds by right the center of the empire is emperor, and the center of the Roman Empire is Constantinople." Now, this is very important in a sense that because Ottoman Empire was, you know, only in this very small location. It wasn't the empire that we knew a century later. And then Constantinople was right in the smack bang in the middle of its territories, although territories were not small, were small. And it wasn't an empire yet. So basically with the conquest of Constantinople, because it was the seat of the Roman Empire, actually Fatih Sultan Mehmet used the title of Roman Empire or Caesar. And why do that? The reason is that, you know, if you conquer, let's say, if you get rid of an emperor, or in those times, in ancient times, if you depose an emperor, you legitimately own the territories controlled by that emperor. So basically, with this title, Fatih Sultan Mehmet and a few sultans after him were able to legitimately claim ownership of, be the heir of the Roman Empire and the political heir. Like, we're not talking about them being Christians or being from the Roman heritage, but it's more of it was a political title or move in that respect. Yeah, so that is really important. And so therefore, like, Fatih wanted to build Constantinople as the capital of the city. He immediately started many public works and repopulate the city. You know, former inhabitants like the Greeks could work in these projects, and they also earned their freedom. They were paid, and they could earn their freedom and live in the city with tax exemptions. So these projects were a way to win back the former inhabitants of the city. Initially the houses that were empty, the people were granted freehold to Muslim settlers, but people didn't want to move, and Fatih even ordered the deportation of 5,000 people to be settled in Constantinople. He also appointed George Scholarius as the Orthodox Patriarch to encourage the return of Christians to the city who fled during the siege. And as a result of this repopulation, these are the figures in a 1477 census. It was 59% Muslim, 21% Greek, and 20% others like Armenians and Gypsies and many other minorities. So it was a cosmopolitan city, but with that 59% Muslim population and also the fact that Fatih wanted to make Istanbul, Constantinople, a capital city, you need a place of worship. You need a place where you could hold large Friday prayers. Like one thing that maybe people don't know much, but in the past, you could not hold Friday prayers in every mosque. There were, in every city, certain mosques were allocated for Friday prayer, as well as normal daily prayers, and they were called jamis. Like the word jami, which Turks use a lot for every mosque, but that was a special title. Now, this is not just the Ottoman Empire, but during Abbasids, Umayyads, this was the case. So if you have you have a Muslim city now, and it's a capital of the Ottoman Empire, so you need immediately a very large place of worship where it can hold everyone in a Friday prayer. And Hagia Sophia was perfect for that. It was the big, massive building, and I went. I think I went 4 or 5 times. It's huge, absolutely massive, even by today's standards. So since all buildings, city was conquered by force, all buildings in that city belong to the conquerors, Fatih Sultan Mehmet. This Hagia Sophia was considered the property of the state, and it was designated to be used as a mosque at the time. So that's so if I was to sum up why Hagia Sophia was converted to a mosque, one, the need for that immediate need to have a Friday prayer, as I explained. And secondly, Fatih Sultan Mehmet needed to populate the city, and there was a need to have a large mosque with markets around it. I'm going to come to this markets issue as well. So basically, you needed something to where the population on that city could gather to pray, and also for the economic activity. That was the way Muslims designed cities. In every city that was built from scratch by Muslims, you always have a big mosque in the center of the city. And also Hagia Sophia symbolized the Roman Empire and legitimacy over its former territories. So basically, the Hagia Sophia was an important symbol of that. It being a mosque also, in a way at the time, it symbolized the superiority of Islam over Christianity, if you put it that way. And also another thing that we need to keep in mind, this conversion of places of worship was happening elsewhere in the world, especially in Andalus, Spain. A lot of the mosques were being converted to churches by Spanish Reconquista, and Muslims were hearing about this. The most famous one being, Alhambra Mosque, the massive mosque, although that was converted to a church, I think it was 1492. It was after the conquest of Constantinople. But nevertheless, a lot of the cities were falling to Spanish, and they were converting all mosques into churches. So it was I wouldn't say this was a retaliation, but converting a symbolic place like Hagia Sophia to a mosque in a way made Muslims feel justified in a sense with respect to all these mosques being converted to churches in Andalus, Spain. So how was Hagia Sophia in the Ottoman era? Well, it became the most important mosque in the Ottoman Istanbul for 2 decades. It was the largest and the biggest mosque, and it was the only place where Friday prayers held. And economic activity, as I mentioned, around this in the Ottoman capital was also centered around Hagia Sophia. The present day Grand Bazaars in Turkish Kapalı Çarşı was started in 1455, just a couple of years after the conquest of Istanbul, and it quickly became the largest and oldest. It became the largest covered markets in the world. You know, before the Westfields and these large shopping centers, this Grand Bazaar was the largest shopping center in the world, actually. Prior to this, the Grand Bazaar, most shops were in streets and in open air. You know, it had, in its heyday, 4,000 shops, and it covered 61 streets. And still, it's a major attraction in Istanbul. And if you have visited Istanbul, it's very close to Hagia Sophia as well. The first large mosque that was constructed after Hagia Sophia was Fatih Mosque in 1470, shown in the picture. And it was this time it was a big complex specifically designed for Muslim usage, and it really surpassed Hagia Sophia. Not with its interior size. Interior size of Hagia Sophia is still bigger than Fatih Mosque, but Fatih Mosque was a complex. It schools, university, and many charities, and so on. And a lot of people don't know that. Like Fatih Mosque was also built on the site of a former Byzantine church. It was called Church of the Holy Apostles, but it was in very poor condition since when it was destroyed almost in the Fourth Crusade. So the reason why these places are chosen for building large mosques like this one is that it already provides a flat ground. So you don't have to really prepare the ground and earth, which takes a huge amount of time and cost. So it was cost efficient to build it in this respect. And after that, many other major mosques were built in Istanbul. They're called Salatin mosques. The one up the top here, on the top left, is Beyazıt Mosque. And on the right, we've got Süleymaniye Mosque. And also here there's a Selimiye Mosque, although this is not in Istanbul, it's in Edirne. And then the famous Sultan Ahmet Mosque, the Blue Mosque, also known as right opposite to Hagia Sophia in present-day Istanbul. Now, you can see that all of these mosques are designed in the same architectural style of Hagia Sophia. So basically, Hagia Sophia really influenced the Muslim mosque building, especially in Ottoman Empire, to a great extent. Like when you go to the old mosque like Attaturk Mosque, the Umayyad Mosque, they have flat timber roofs. They don't have domes. So this dome usage was started really after Hagia Sophia. This mosque here, the Selimiye Mosque, even the architect Sinan, when he was building this mosque, he goes to the Sultan and says, "Oh Sultan, the Europeans are saying that although Ottomans are powerful, these Muslims, they can't even build a mosque which has a bigger dome than Hagia Sophia. So we need to refute these infidels of European infidels, by building a mosque which will have a bigger dome than Hagia Sophia, and this was built just 0.5 meters bigger than Hagia Sophia. So Hagia Sophia really impacted the places of worship in Turkey, in Ottoman Empire, to a huge degree. Just need to clear this. Sorry. Okay. All right. So how was it converted into a mosque? So this is museum. I guess Hagia Sophia was a mosque for 600 years, for a long time, but it was converted into a mosque museum in 1934. And this is the signature of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, which kind of gave the go-ahead to convert it into a museum. Some people say this is not original or this is a fake, but that hasn't been confirmed. But nevertheless, we have two good sources to understand why it was converted into a museum. But before I go into there are some conspiracy theories or common explanations of why Hagia Sophia was converted into a museum. The first one, the argument one, is that it was the condition of conversion, and this was a secret condition of the Lausanne Treaty signed in 1923 by new Republic of Turkey and the European powers. It was this treaty that recognized the modern Republic of Turkey, and it abolished the Ottoman Empire. So it was a very important treaty. It was negotiated over a long term. It's very detailed, and some people say that especially in Islamic politicians in Turkey are really popularized this idea in 1980s and 1990s with like milli görüş type of explanations. They said that they claimed that it was a secret treaty of the Lausanne, secret condition of Lausanne Treaty. But the thing is, there is no evidence for this. There was no need to have these secret clauses. There were many compromises and concessions are worse than converting Hagia Sophia. So it's very unlikely that such a condition would be made and then kept secret. And how do you keep it secret, if it's not written down? The Lausanne Treaty is well documented and it's available. And also, there is an 11-year gap between the treaty and the decision to convert. It just doesn't explain. If it was the condition of the treaty, it should have been converted into a museum long before 1934. So this one doesn't have too much of a ground. There's also a second argument that it was converted to a museum by the pressure of foreign powers on the modern Republic of Turkey. Now, there were really nothing major happening to compel Turkey at the time in 1934 to convert Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Europe was going through Great Depression, much like today's, coronavirus, and economy went like into recession 20%, 30%, and went for 3 years. So, hardly people were, one would expect that when you're going through such problems, why would you put pressure on Turkey to convert a building into a museum? And also there was the threat of Hitler and Mussolini in Europe at the time. So Europe, and we're assuming that foreign powers were European powers, and European powers were busy with other major things. Unfortunately, this is sometimes made, like Muslims sometimes, yes, foreign powers colonized the Muslim world, and they did control much of the Muslim world, and that's been very destructive. Then you had the Cold War after that, and even today, with lately invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on, the world powers are involved in Muslim affairs of the Muslim country. But again, we're talking about a building. It is a highly symbolic building. Okay, the third argument, which kind of says that the reforms that Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and his government to secularize Turkey went just too far. They were just new rulers of Turkey had no Islamic sensitivities, and for them, it didn't really matter a building, a mosque was converted to a museum or not. Now this one has more grounds. it's more closer to the truth. And you know, there were a lot of reforms made in Turkey in that after 1923 to remove Islam from society and Ottomans from Turkish identity. So both of these were important. Alphabet was changed in Turkey from Arabic numeral, Arabic alphabet to Latin alphabet. This picture is iconic on the right when Mustafa Kemal is teaching the new alphabet to Turkish people. And it didn't just stop with that. You know, the clothing was changed. All of the religious endowments were nationalized. Sufi lodges were closed. The religious education was prohibited. Even the azan, the call to prayer, was converted from Arabic to Turkish in 1932. So with all of that happening, you know, okay, let's convert Hagia Sophia into a mosque. It's not too far-fetched, you know, after making even more significant changes and reforms. So basically, Hagia Sophia was the final act of reform, symbolizing total abandonment of the past and a new beginning for Turkish people in the modern world. Now, we have some evidence to suggest some reasoning behind it, why it was converted to a museum and nothing else. The first one comes from Grace Ellison. She was an English reporter and author, lived a lot in Istanbul in the late Ottoman era, and also in the modern republic. She published a number of books, including this one, An English Woman in Ankara, or Angora at the time. And in this book, she reveals the conversation she had with Mustafa Kemal Attaturk. And where she comes to visit him after seeing Pope Pius in 1923. And this is just after the independence war in Turkey, where supposedly Pope Pius was really concerned about war, you know, expanding into Europe and not stopping with the independence war. And then he was really concerned that it would lead to a war between Christians and Muslims, or turn into a religious war. And she asks Mustafa Kemal if he can do a good gesture to the Christian world to prevent further bloodshed. And she says, why not return Hagia Sophia to Pope? And or to Christians, basically, converted back into a church. She proposes this in her mind, in her book, to Mustafa Kemal. And Mustafa Kemal gives this response. And I got this from the book because it's important to, I guess, that's the only document we have. And Mustafa Kemal says, we are so anxious to do all in our power to help to honor Christianity in the eyes of the world, that if by our retaining St. Sophia as a mosque, we are really giving offense to the Catholic Church, we would either turn it into a museum or close it forever. Excuse me, just... none must ever be able to say that we have intentionally injured the Christian Church. So basically, she says that he doesn't want, and it goes on to explain that Mustafa Kemal thought if this place was converted into a museum, if it was converted into a church, it would actually cause a rift between, or competitive rift between Christian denominations, and then you know, Turkey or Istanbul would become a conflict of Christian nature. So he says it's better to leave it either as a museum or just close it down forever. So this happens in 1923, and nothing is done after that. And then we have an account of how it was converted into a museum by Abidin Osman, who was the Minister of Education in 1934. And he's the guy on the top, in the image on the top right-hand side of the image, talking to Mustafa Kemal. And he says that he wrote a long explanation in the book, the honor book of Hagia Sophia Museum in 1949. And he said that in a dinner, Mustafa Kemal suggested that Hagia Sophia should belong to all religions and all peoples of the world rather than belonging to one religion, i.e. Islam. And that museum would be the best option. And you see an image there on the bottom, a dinner table where Mustafa Kemal is talking to his cabinet. This is famous, you know, Mustafa Kemal did a lot of his policies every night. He had conversations and this is, by the way, it was very usual at the time on these strong men in 1930s, 1940s. They usually dealt with the state policies over dinner table, and the people who were listening took everything they said as policy, and they acted on it. And we see this with, I don't want to compare Mustafa Kemal to Hitler, but when you look at, you know, the ministers of Hitler, how they explained, you know, Hitler never wrote down anything. They didn't have a parliament either. Everything was just talked there on the dinner table, and then they interpreted those to be instructions to do things. So this was no different. And actually the next day he takes action, and he says that he liked the idea and everyone else liked it. And then the next day he spoke to the Prime Minister Ismet İnönü about the idea of converting it to a museum. And then they first transferred it to Ministry of Education and then to a museum. Like, Ministry of Education was responsible for all the museums in Turkey at the time. So basically it was very quick. There was no public consultation. There was no, nothing really talked about. It was just converted just like that. Now, the most charitable interpretation of this, again, we shouldn't be reading intentions and what's happening behind the scenes, we don't know. But the most charitable interpretation is that they thought this was a good idea that would bridge the gap between East and the West. And probably, and at the time, these Turkish officials had absolutely no Islamic sensitivity. And so for them, converting something that was a church into a museum was nothing. And I think that has a lot to do with it, that they were not religiously motivated at all. But obviously the majority of the Turks at the time, and also Muslims, by the way, saw this as a great act of treachery or disloyalty to Islam. And you know, Muslim world looked up to Istanbul. Istanbul was the capital of the Caliphate for more than 400 years. And so what happened in Istanbul, what happened to Hagia Sophia was really important. And in 1934, just about the entire Muslim world, with the exception of Turkey, was still under colonization. So it was a big blow to Muslim sensitivities, and it came to symbolize the colonization of the Muslim world, not just territorially, but also culturally and religiously as well. Now, what about converting it back to a mosque again in 2020? Now, this one, Muslims in general supported the conversion. You know, some people were critical that it wasn't a good time or it was a wrong move, especially considering where the world is at this point in time. You don't want to create another reason for conflict. But by and large, the things that I saw in social media, Muslim media, and talking to a lot of Muslims, I saw that majority of them were happy for this, for different reasons. And now, why was it, like, why did the Turkish government decide to convert Hagia Sophia into a mosque at this point in time? Well, there are three reasons for this. And the first one is that the Hagia Sophia became a political symbol of Islamic politicians in Turkey. And it was an easy illustration of their political theories, which is that the current rulers in Muslim countries are controlled by Western powers. And since Ottoman Empire collapsed, since Caliphate collapsed, the Muslim world was the pawn of the world powers, you know, United States, Britain, and other European countries, and it was easy to illustrate with Hagia Sophia their theories, because there was really no reason to convert it into a museum. Like, there was no public need for a museum, and it was a mosque, and it was a huge mosque, and it had the symbolic value of the Ottoman Empire and Muslim ascendancy in 15th century. After the Crusades, the Mongol invasions, it was a very important symbol, and for it to be converted from a mosque into a museum, there had to be, in people's eyes, some sinister reasons for it. And so these political Islamists made a lot of uses of that. You see this in their publications, in a lot of the public speeches in 1980s, 1990s, all the time. They also promised that if they come to power, they would return Hagia Sophia back into a mosque again. So that was it became a symbol of defiance to secularism and all the injustices of secularism that was done to religious people in Turkey and beyond. The second, and that's the second reason, the Muslims in Turkey and elsewhere, they were hungry for an act of defiance of world powers, interference in Muslim countries. So it kind of, I heard like Muslims say, at last, a Muslim country and a Muslim leader would make a decision independently of world powers, even if they do something they don't want to do and they wouldn't like, So it was it's an emotional thing, it makes Muslims feel good and maybe think that, Muslims are rising up their place in history once again. And finally, there was Turkish government saw an opportunity to take advantage of this sentiment to increase in popularity in Turkey and the Muslim world. Especially in Turkey, economy wasn't going well before coronavirus, and during coronavirus it's not doing good as well. And also popularity, the polls are suggesting popularity of the government is going down. So this was a populist move to get support of the religious base of the current government in Turkey, and it was surely a lot of Muslims around the world rejoiced it. So that's why Hagia Sophia was converted back to a mosque, and Hagia Sophia will continue to be a major architectural masterpiece and a historic building for the world, regardless of its use. People will, non-Muslims can still visit the place, when they come to Istanbul. And you can see this with the Sultan Ahmet Mosque, for example. It's the most visited site one of the most visited sites in Istanbul at this point in time. So still people were praying 5 times a day and holding Friday prayers in the Sultan Ahmet Mosque. Even they had like barriers in the middle of the mosque where visitors would be behind the barriers and those who want to pray would go before it. And I prayed like that a few times in Sultanahmet Mosque. I think at the moment they will do the same thing. And there were some interesting responses from the Christian world. You know, I have spoken to a few people, or when they called me when this happened, they expressed their sadness for the conversion, and that's understandable. You know, I am sad for conversion of Alhambra Mosque into a church. You know, you're saddened by things like this as a follower of a religion. And some, interestingly, I saw one particular a Greek priest. He was saying that it's better that it's now a mosque because it will be a place of worship rather than just a museum, because it was always intended as a place of worship. That's a very good response, in a sense that yes, it is a place of worship. So in that respect, you know, most Muslims cannot really argue for the conversion. It was a mosque. I mean, the first conversion from a church to a mosque is a greater. It was a greater issue at the time. So you know, it would be good to visit Constantinople, Istanbul one day, and also visit the new Hagia Sophia Mosque. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Ozalp. Very informative, and some very beautiful illustrations there, like that one you just brought up now, that nighttime illustration. I must admit, one of my favorite places in Istanbul is actually in that green, lush green lawn area with the fountains between the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. It's just a very, very beautiful and special place. I think it's very nice. So we're collating the questions as they've come through. Now, Brother Matthew will be sending them on to me, and we have a few questions to put to you, Doctor. And but just before we get to that, I just wanted to do a little bit of advertising, not too much. We have at ISRA, we have a competition coming up called "Everyone is Thinking About Him." This is about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's a competition where you are required to enter in two ways: either read a book and sit an exam regarding the book. And there's another way where you can submit some sort of creative sort of submission, poetry or some sort of electronic submission. I'm not exactly sure, but the submissions and the test has to be set on by October. Sorry, I should have known this. October 25. Okay, and so for further details, go to the ISRA webpage, www.isra.org.au. And also another event on the Prophet Muhammad. On September 25, Dr. Ozalp will be interviewing Dr. Craig Constantine from America, who is a Christian and who has written a book on the Prophet Muhammad called The Humanity of Prophet Muhammad. And he's written that book, and Dr. Mehmet Ozalp will be interviewing him. That's September 25. So again, that one's not advertised yet, but it will be out on the website with details within the coming week or so. So www.isra.org.au, look out for that one. Okay, so we'll go to some questions now. And the first one, question 1. So, understand the conversion in elsewhere was happening at the time, but with the Hagia Sophia's conversion, would it be fair to say it is against our traditional teaching still?
Okay. Yes. Well, it is again a tradition of Islam. Like looking at it purely from Quran and Sunnah, there's nothing in Quran that says, you know, allows conversion of a place of worship, another place of worship into a mosque. Actually, there's a verse in the Quran where it talks about if it wasn't for some of our servants repelling others, mosques, synagogues, monasteries, and churches, you would not find people praising God and worshiping God. So it's churches are included, you know, as places of worship where God is remembered and worshipped. It's in the Quran, you know, and in the Sunnah of the Prophet, we also don't see any example of that at all, where a place was converted into a place of worship. On the contrary, whenever a Muslim army was sent, the Prophet gave instructions not to harm places of worship or, touch anybody, or especially, the priests, bishops, religious people and civilians who take refuge in places of worship. Also, we have from the companions, we don't have any example of the companions of the Prophet because they conquered a lot of territories, after the passing of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And with one notable example, that when Omar, second Caliph, went to Jerusalem, they asked him to pray inside the Church of Holy Sepulchre, and he refused. He said, maybe people will convert this place into a mosque. So he prayed outside in another place. So we see the sensitivities like this in that early on. There's nothing in the Islamic, like strictly speaking, in Quran and Sunnah, which would allow you to convert a place of worship. As I said, it was purely, it wasn't a religious decision of Sultan Mehmet. It was a political decision, and it was also a decision of, building the city and Ottoman Empire. So it was, he made that decision as a ruler. It wasn't illegal in a sense. However, it wasn't Islamic either.
There is a difference of opinion on that, though, isn't there? We'd have to.
Yeah.
There always is, I guess.
I guess, when you say it's not illegal, it's not illegal purely from the perspective of Islamic law. One thing we should note, that Islamic law also developed, with the realities of its time, what was happening around the world. And like, for example, today, it would be unthinkable, you conquer a city, sack it, or convert places of worship. Like that would be seen barbaric by the rest of the world. But at that time, it was like purely okay. Nobody saw that as a problem, including Christians themselves.
Okay, so next question. Was it a trend in those times to convert churches and other temples to mosques after conquest? Were other churches in Constantinople converted into a mosque?
It wasn't the case. Like, we don't know of widespread conversions, or like it wasn't definitely a habit. Like Ottomans conquered a lot of places in the history, like in the long history. Conversion of churches into mosques were not done on a regular basis. It was only done if a church was unused. Like, for example, you conquer a city, people just migrate or leave, then naturally some of the churches will not be used as it was before. And certainly there were other smaller churches in Istanbul that were not used, and they were either converted into dwellings or places of worship. But just one thing that we should note, that Fatih Sultan Mehmet himself was an extremely tolerant person, and he has a famous Ahdname, when Bosnia was conquered, or Serbia, and he gave freedom to the church there, Catholic church there, and that Ahdname, the document, is still displayed in their church. So, like, Ottomans by and large were very tolerant of the Christian populations, and they gave religious, educational, and even economic freedoms. Compared to the rest of the world, it was very progressive. Like, even when the Spanish Reconquista, by a contrasting example, they were exiling, Jews and Muslims from Spain, and a lot of the Jews actually ended up migrating into the Ottoman Empire. The Fatih Sultan Mehmet's son, Beyazıt himself, took a lot of refugees, and he settled them in Balkans and throughout the empire properly. You know, they were given houses, land, and you know, enough money for them to, you know, have a living.
Okay, thank you. Why convert it now in 2020 and not earlier on in history?
Well, firstly, a lot of the secular governments in Turkey would never convert Hagia Sophia to a mosque. And the current government is secular as well, you would say, but they come from, like Tayyip Erdogan and his friends come from the Milli Görüş line. Milli Görüş was established by Erbakan, and they very openly said, you know, if they come to power, they will implement some of the Islamic norms and laws. Like, one could really question to what extent he's doing that and why in present time. This was the issue of converting Hagia Sophia was mentioned a number of times actually in Turkish media for the last 5 years. And every time President Erdogan said, we're not going to fall into that trap, or this is a trap, he's been using those type of languages. It was really a surprise to everyone that it was done this year. As I said, no one knows exactly why he chose that way. But firstly, he has absolute power almost in Turkey, so he can do it. He can do whatever he wants. And if he chose to do it now, especially when he was saying that it was a trap in the past, he must have seen a good reason for himself and for Turkey. Obviously, looking at it from outside, it doesn't look like a good timing.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question. Have any conditions been placed with it being converted back into a mosque? For instance, to retain artwork and artifacts, to keep it open to visits?
Yes, what they're doing is that they're not going to cover the paintings and the mosaics that are in Hagia Sophia. There's a lot of them. And you know, when it was converted to a mosque by Fatih, they were covered by some rendering, and then they were opened again after it was converted into a museum. So they're not going to cover it now completely. So they said that they were going to put some movable screens. So when it was the time for prayer, they'll electronically cover the images through some screening. And then after that, they would open it again for visitors to see those mosaics. Other than that, they put carpet to the whole floor. It wasn't carpeted before. And I haven't seen it, to be honest, so I don't know what other changes they made, but that was just about it. The place was looked after pretty well. I would think they need to add some washing facilities. You know, it wasn't there before. So I'm really curious to see what they did with the ablution areas.
Okay, here's an interesting one. What about the legal aspect of reconverting it into a mosque in today's understanding? So not about when it was originally converted to a mosque, reconverting it to a mosque now. It's a legal question, so it's an Islamic legal question, I guess. So
yeah, the Islamic legal or secular Turkish legal?
Well, it just says, what about the legal aspect of reconverting it into a mosque in today's understanding? I read that as being Islamic legal, but answer to however you see.
Okay. Look, maybe one thing that most people don't know, that you could actually pray in Hagia Sophia before. In the, I think it's in the northern end, there was a large area, not inside the main, you know, the basilica or prayer area, but outside. There was 5 daily prayers, and azan was being called through the minarets as well. I actually prayed in that area before. So you could pray before as well in Hagia Sophia. But from a legal perspective, I mean, the building is owned by Turkish Republic, you know, by Turks. So from an Islamic perspective, you could convert it into a mosque. There's no barrier for that. And also from the secular Turkish laws perspective, there was no barrier as well. There was a executive decision, and then it was ratified by Danıştay, you know, which is like a consultative body in the state Turkish government, and it was easily converted from a legal sense. So there's really no legal barrier for it to be converted into a mosque.
Okay, thank you. Why was the protest from Christian world not as loud as one would expect after the latest conversion?
Well, one could only imagine that the Christian world is under a lot of stress, and also going through a hard time with modernity, with religion being almost in the background of society. So Muslim, like Western governments, or let's say Christian majority countries, are not ruled by the church as much as, I mean, I don't know what Muslims usually think, but it's not ruled by the church. And even with the latest, you know, child abuse issues, church has really become silent on a lot of things. So you could expect church to be loud, or religious people in the Western world to make protests, but they were, I guess, people were busy making protests for the Black Lives Matter and other things, and there's a lockdown happening in much of the world. Maybe that was a good timing, like from a perspective of the Turkish government, it was a good timing in that they wouldn't be able to protest that much. So I don't know if they considered that particular aspect when they made the decision, but it was the time when it's not easy to have protests. As you know, a lot of the protests in Sydney for Black Lives Matters were stopped by the government and police for fear of, you know, spreading coronavirus. So one wouldn't expect that they would have an exception for Hagia Sophia.
Okay, we've got another question. They all seem to be around the conversion issue so far. That's where the focus seems to be. This question is, my understanding is that in spite of its conversion into a mosque, visitors are still allowed. Would that be true?
That's right. The visitors are allowed in Turkey. All mosques actually, visitors can just walk in, you know, outside of the prayer times. Even during prayer times, you know, I've seen in Istanbul, you know, tourists just sitting at the back, really large number of them as well. Like, people are really used to it in Istanbul. And the only exception is the Friday prayer. Like, Friday prayer, as you know, the mosques are very busy and space is an issue. So that it wouldn't be visited around on the Friday prayer times. But other times, and actually, you would say that they could now visit it for free. Before it was like $100 or something per person, and now they're not going to be charged. From a touristic perspective, they've got a good deal.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so here's a non-convergent one. Were the domes and minarets always there in Hagia Sophia, even when it was a church? And does that mean domes and minarets predate Islam?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Thank you. Maybe I can just illustrate in this image. This dome here was always there. So it was built, or when it was built the third time, the dome was there. The previous two constructions had no dome. It was just a timber roof. But when it was built in 537, it had this huge dome. And also these are called semi-domes. They were there. These are also supporting columns there. The minarets were added later by Ottomans when it was converted into a mosque. And you might see that, or it's not obvious in this particular image, that all of them are different styles. So they were not built all at the same time. Like this one's a smaller, this one's a little bit thicker, for example. The first, one of the minarets were built first, and then the others were built to support the building. You know, it was going to collapse a few times. So the bases of these minarets are really thick, they're supporting the structure. The things that you see here, these domes are just burial places of sultans. They're not part of the mosque, they're just tombs. Yeah, so basically minarets weren't there all the time, but the main dome was.
Okay, thanks. So we have to admit that the iconic Turkish dome-style mosque was modelled on a church. The minarets are still Turkish and Islamic, right?
That's right. That's right. And when you combine the minarets with the dome, it becomes Turkish.
Yes. Okay, so where we go? The Hagia Sophia in Trabzon was converted to a mosque and the work was very shoddy. The mosaics were not properly cared for. I'm worried about the conversion not being sensitive.
In Trabzon?
Well, that's what they're saying. They're saying the Hagia Sophia in Trabzon, I didn't know there was one. The Hagia Sophia in Trabzon was converted to a mosque and the work was very shoddy. The mosaics were not properly cared for, and I'm worried about the conversion not being sensitive.
Okay, that's talking about the conversion, not now, but again in the Ottoman era. Trabzon is in the northern Turkey, in the Black Sea. It's towards the middle of Black Sea coastline. And it was actually, there was a Greek state there for a long time, even after it was called Pontus Roman, empire or state. It was also Fatih Sultan Mehmet that ended that. And the entire region became Muslim, over time. And some people migrated, but those who stayed back, they were all converted to Islam, not by force, by their choice. So basically, all these churches, fell out of use. They were converted into mosques. So I think that's giving that example.
I think the sister just sent a message for on chat. Sorry.
I'm not familiar with how it was done or what conditions it's at. I won't be able to comment on that.
I think the question just sent a message on chat saying there is one in Trabzon. It's a sister one to the Hagia Sophia. This Hagia Sophia there. So it's interesting.
Yeah, there is a big monastery in that. A few big monasteries, really historic and picturesque in the coastline there. Okay.
All right. So next question. What is the significance? I think you might have covered this in the actual talk. Actually, what is the significance of the name Hagia Sophia?
Well, Hagia Sophia means holy wisdom, and it's a name. Like Hagia Irini is a lot of the Greeks at the time, call the places of worship of that nature. It's like names of God that we have in Islam. Certain attributes of God were given to places of worship, and in this case, there is. I remember reading that it symbolized the second of the Trinity, because wisdom or logos, like logos in the Greek Orthodox understanding, symbolized the Holy Spirit. And so Hagia Sophia kind of symbolized the Holy Spirit. There's even a story where the rest of Constantinople was going to almost imminent. The Greeks in the city, or the Christians, they say that they saw this fire circulating around the dome, and then this light coming up, very sharp light, and then going into the sky. They kind of interpreted that as the Holy Spirit deserting the place and it falling into the hands of Muslims. I mean, we don't know whether that's true or even if it's true, it could be all this cannon fire and all these, the siege that may have caused it. God knows.
We've just received another clarification from Fia. She's saying that the conversion of the Hagia Sophia in Trabzon was a practice run for the Hagia Sophia. She's saying it was a practice run for the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. So,
okay.
I thought she was saying that the building of that church there was a practice run. Anyhow, okay. Here's quite a controversial question here. So, get ready for this one. How Islamic was the Ottoman Empire? Is it true Fatih Sultan ordered his siblings to be executed for the betterment of the state?
Okay, that's another lecture, But one thing we should always keep in mind, the Muslims have a tendency to sanitize history. Like we don't like going into problematic areas, and then sometimes the history is depicted as if it was perfect. They were all perfect Muslims, perfect human beings. Now, we should always keep in mind that humans are fallible. They do make mistakes. They do wrong things. What they do as wrong thing should not be blamed on Islam. Islam doesn't condone everything. And even people, when they do something in the name of Islam, doesn't mean that's Islamic. And we see that today, with the radicalism and all of those things that happen. Now, the Ottoman Empire was an Islamic empire, as Islamic as any fallible human, country could be. They're not perfect, like they weren't perfect, and not everything that sultans did were also good or legitimate. But one thing that they did things within law, like they always tried to do it. There was rule of law, there was meritocracy, like religion was really implemented freely, we should say. There was no stopping of, there was religion. There was like Shaykhul Islam, the head of religious institutions, was part of the cabinet in the Ottoman Empire. And then he was in charge of the judges and the imams and places of worship. And that he could actually impeach the Sultan. And there's examples of, a couple of examples of Shaykhul Islam impeaching the Sultan and also reversing some of the executive decisions of the Sultans. And one of them related to Hagia Sophia is, I can say, the Grand Bazaar of Hagia Sophia was part of the endowment, the Waqf of Hagia Sophia. So basically, from those lease of those shops came to the mosque and its endowment, and there was a lot of like 1,500 mosques shops at the time, and people were like hiring and then re-leasing it more expensively. It's like it was the most commercially prime location in the city. That was ratified by the Sultan, Suleiman actually, but the Shaykhul Islam reversed it because he thought that it was illegal for people to release a Waqf property. So that's a really good example of that. But one thing that we could say is that by Ottomans institutionalized the ulama class, or took it under the government control, maybe not completely, not like today, the relationship Diyanet, for example, in Turkey with the government. They still had autonomy, but not like the before. The ulama were completely independent before Ottomans. But it kind of worked, for 3-4 centuries really well. But after that, it didn't work. It became a bit of a problem in country modernizing. Now, in terms of the child fratricide issue, that was instituted later when the entire empire and was under turmoil with the brothers fighting each other. You know, these brothers fighting each other after a sultan or a ruler was very much, it happened all the time. You know, it's full of, in world history, and also Muslim countries were no different. Like, for example, Harun al-Rashid had two sons, Amin and al-Ma'mun. They both fought each other for 2 years. Baghdad was siege, you know. So in the Ottoman Empire, there was a 10-year period where this happened, and it actually caused a crusade because of it. And one of the sultans was captured by the Venetians and sold, then handed to Pope, and then Pope used it against Ottoman Empire, kind of humiliated the entire Ottomans and Muslims. So they kind of saw, the Ottomans then saw this as a problem, that if one of the brothers or the son of a ruler was to rebel, that then they would, if they were caught, they would be executed. Now, this is actually within Islamic law. Rebellion is, you know, punishable by capital punishment. Maybe half of the examples that happened in the Ottoman Empire was actual rebellions that was happening, that people took arms. But there was a number of the brothers were killed. I mean, they were just children, you know, and so it was definitely illegal from that, even the Ottoman perspective. But by the way, there was only 39 of such instances in 600 years, and one sultan is responsible for 19 of them. So it was really, it was rare as well.
Okay, thank you.
That like the Ottomans thought, and the Muslim scholars at the time thought that it was better for, I know, these people would be executed than they cause fight, and then a lot of people die as a result of civil war. So it was like a lesser of the two evils.
So the Sultan and the Islamic rule and the Sheikh al-Islam was like a checks and balances system in government, right?
There was, yes. The Sheikh al-Islam was appointed by the Sultan, but after the appointment, he acted independently of the Sultan. He was salaried by the Sultan, but he couldn't be removed, to my knowledge. He couldn't be removed from that job once appointed. It's a bit like today, you know, we've got in Australia or Western countries, the chief judges, they are appointed by the head of state or president or prime minister, and then once they're appointed, they become independent. It's a bit like that. It's not the perfect system, but it was still far more progressive compared to the rest of the world.
Okay, thank you. Look, there's just a couple more questions, but I've just got one of my own, if you don't mind. Just one, and you touched on it earlier. You touched on it earlier on when you're talking about like conquest. Like when you talk about conquest in the old days, in ancient times or whatever, borders were very fluid and subject to a stronger army coming in and taking it over and saying that's our land now by brute strength or whatever, right? But in the modern era, it doesn't happen anymore. You couldn't imagine some country moving in just taking over someone else's land. The last time I can think, maybe it was someone tried, like I think in Iraq when they tried to take over Kuwait, the rest of the world, they didn't let it happen, right? You couldn't do that now, could you? But now, but back in the days, the borders were very fluid, weren't they? And subject to takeover.
Well, kind of, just yes, but I just like to modify what you said to mean that the international norms and relationships were one of warfare as a first thing rather than peace. Like you had to sign a peace treaty for you to be considered peaceful relationships. Without that, you could be attacked anytime, and you could attack anytime. But today it's completely the opposite. Like the normal international relationships are one of peace and freedom of movement and transportation, and only war happens when you declare war. You know, in the old days you had to declare war as well, but sometimes you didn't declare it. You just even kept it secret. A lot of the Ottoman expeditions, they had reasons. They had some legal reasons on those expeditions, and you could find reasons very easily in those times. You know, someone would attack in the borders and, you know, kill Muslims in a village. You know, that would be reason for warfare. Yeah, like when, for example, Sultan Mehmet, when he first was made sultan by his father abdicated when he was 11 years old. And then the European powers, you know, at the time thought that, oh, okay, this is our opportunity, let's attack. They were preparing an army, and Sultan Mehmet himself called back his father, and father didn't want to come back. And then he sent his father a letter saying, if you're the Sultan, come to your army. If I'm the Sultan, I'm ordering you, come take charge of the army. You know, so you're right in the sense that the international relations were completely different and opposite to today. And then sometimes, yeah, we shouldn't really evaluate what happened in the past with today's standards and norms. Then you would be making mistakes. We really have to go into that time and see what was people's motivations. Was it legal, illegal, progressive, not progressive, things like that.
Okay, thanks for that. I have one last question here. So this questioner is saying mosques doesn't have any human pictures inside, but Hagia Sophia has quite a few pictures. Are they going to be erased? I think you might have talked about this in your...
I think we responded to that before. They wouldn't be erased because those are historically very significant, you know, mosaics and artwork and artifacts. It wouldn't be right to remove them. So what they're doing now is that they're putting a screen around those mosaics and images. So when it's time for prayer, they're going to cover it. And then otherwise they leave it open for visitors to have a look. I have to give it to, you know, the Turkish people and government, the respect that they pay to places of historical significance. If it was in Saudi Arabia, you know, you'd easily those will be destroyed or removed for sure. I mean, let alone Christian, you know, symbols in Saudi Arabia removed a lot of the Islamically significant, you know, buildings and places, including Prophet's house, for example. So it's always sad to lose, you know, places of historical significance and heritage. So at least, you know, they're keeping that, and there's nothing wrong with, you know, Islamically praying in a place with images as long as it's covered. The Prophet, peace be upon him, prayed that way when there were like some textiles or fabrics with the images on it. He covered it and then prayed.
Thank you. Oh, look, I've got one late question coming, but it's related to what I just mentioned just before. So we take this one, but I think no more after this, Matthew, if you don't mind. If we cannot relate today's standards to the past, then how can we understand the reconversion today in 2020?
Look, we can. I'm not saying that we should never, you know, evaluate past with today's standards. I'm saying that the first thing we should do is evaluate the past in its own terms, you know, in its context, historical context and the conditions of those times. That will enable us to understand, you know, why the people act the way they do. And then, you know, you could still look at it from today's standards and see if their behavior still hold up in a universal sense or not. And that would be an act of, or test of universality, and not all, it doesn't always measure up to that. So I'm not saying we should never, you know, evaluate it from today's standards. We should, of course, do it. And that's why, like, for example, when we look at Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, how he behaved in certain, it was far ahead of his time. Even today's standards, he was ahead of his time. So it really helps us understand that universality and the humanity that he had. And that is actually, it's a good segue to our next event, that's what we're going to discuss, hopefully on 25th of September.
Yes. Look, there's one last comment that's coming from Fee, and she was the one talking about this, the Hagia Sophia mosque in troubles. And so I just want to mention that, just so she doesn't think that we've let her comment go unspoken. She's saying that her point is the mosaics and the troubles on Hagia Sophia have not been treated with respect. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, granted, if it's not treated with respect, fine, it should be.
It should be.
Yeah, I don't have knowledge about those. Maybe we can look up later afterwards, inshallah.
Okay, all right. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ozalp, for that talk. I hope it's left us all a little bit more informed about the topic. And as he mentioned just earlier, please look out for the upcoming interview discussion with Dr. Craig Constantine from America. He's a Christian, wrote the book, The Humanity of the Prophet Muhammad, and Dr. Ozalp will be discussing that book with him September 25, I believe it is. It will be it's not on the website yet, but it will be on there within the next week or so. Please look out for that. And we have the competition. Everybody's talking about him. Submissions to be in by October, and I've lost that date again. I think it was 4th. Go to the website, please, to look at that. And that's it from here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time soon, inshallah. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mehmet.
Good night, everyone.
Very good.
Thank you, everyone, for staying on. Bye-bye.